excited to be here. I have some notes so I don't talk too long, because that would be the absolute worst. Well, I'm wondering tonight, before I get right into it, do you all know what priest positioning is? Have you ever experienced priest positioning? Not a single person, okay, I'm the only one, that's awkward. Priest positioning is when you go to like one of those big events and they have different lines for confession, but it's like one line going to multiple priests, and you're trying to get a certain priest that you want. And so you like are really polite to people, so you're kind of watching and you're seeing, that one guy over there is taking a long time, and this guy seems fast, and you get all worked out up the line, and then all of a sudden something changes, and you've got to reposition yourself in the line, so you say things like, "Oh, you can go ahead of me if you'd like," or "I need a little more time to pray." And so I found myself in a situation like this once where I was trying to priest position. I wanted to get a certain priest because I'd heard that he gave a certain kind of penance. He sort of gave you sort of some, let you put some input into the penance. And I had some particularly difficult sins to get off my chest. And so I go through this whole process, and I get myself in there, and I make a confession, and just like I expected, he says, well, Nick, what do you think that your penance should be? And you see, I was kind of hoping to kill two birds with one stone here, because the holidays were coming up, and I didn't want to have to go to my in-laws. And so I said, well, Father, I think that over the Christmas season, I need to make a pilgrimage somewhere, and preferably to maybe a shrine somewhere far away. And he says, no, he says, I don't think that's going to suffice for what you've done. He said, I think I would like you to go and explain Christ to 16, 17, and 18-year-old young men and women. And so that backfired on me. So why would that be difficult, right? And that's the question we ask ourselves all the time, is why is it difficult to talk to young men and women about God? And it comes back to really what's going on in our culture. We live in a culture that's kind of working through two different things right now, two ism-type words. The first is rationalism, which many of you, or all of you, probably can wrap your head around that, right? It's just the idea that we can reason our way into truth, that we can just use maybe science, that word gets thrown out a lot. We can use logic, and we can use all of those things to find God. And if we just have enough reason, enough logic, or maybe a good enough AI in our computer, we can pin God into a sort of a scientific paper. So that's rationalism. And then there's this idea of immanentism. This is that everything that is immanent is all that matters. That for each of us, we have certain things that are immanent, and whatever's immanent for me is different than what's immanent for you, but my experience of God is different than your experience of God. It's the idea that God only exists kind of right around us, that God isn't transcendent and somewhere else. And so when we're dealing with kids who are a product of our culture, or maybe we're dealing with ourselves and our own doubts that we have around our faith, these are the sorts of things that we're going to run up against. And so tonight I want to take a dive with you into a little bit of a rationalist view or an immanent view of our faith. Because sometimes to walk along with these people, we have to sort of walk into the suffering with them, right? Today's reading, incidentally, and I think, very fortuitously, was the walk to Emmaus. And in the walk to Emmaus, the two disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. Everything is happening in Jerusalem. Christ is crucified in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is sort of that city where it's like the center of their faith, and these disciples are walking away from it. And Christ walks with them away from Jerusalem for a little while, right? He doesn't just turn them around. He doesn't appear to them immediately and say, hey, turn around, let's go back. Sometimes we have to sort of walk away with the people. So if we're talking to somebody, maybe you're in a conversation, I would hope that I can maybe give you a few skills for that tonight. So that's the reason for this talk, for an increase in faith, but maybe not in the way that you expected. So with that, I just want to say, before I get started, I want to say thank you so much for allowing me to be here and do this, because it's a great grace to be here. Do you know how comedians get famous? There's actually a really defined strategy for comedians. They go to all of these small clubs and they try out all their jokes and they watch and they see if people laugh, and then if they laugh, then they add that to their routine, and then they go do like a really big show and they only do the ones that people laughed at. So for me to be here tonight, it's a pleasure, because getting to talk about God and look at all of you while I do that, that sort of tells me where I'm at, okay? And so if, you know, if you want to laugh, you can laugh. If you want to cry, you can cry. That's fine too. Then I'll really know that at the heart of it. So, all right. Well, let's talk. We're going to talk about three things tonight. First, we're going to talk about a rationalistic way to talk about salvation. It's a word that we throw out there a lot. We're going to talk a little bit about faith versus works. This is the common Protestant way that people always question Catholicism. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the real presence in Eucharist, which is a big topic that it is very hard to talk to a 17 or 18-year-old young man or woman, or maybe just to talk to yourself about it. And so first, let's talk about salvation. Salvation is one of those words that I would say becomes platitudinous. We use it almost all of the time as Christians. We say, well, Christ saves us, right? Or we are saved by Christ. And the question sometimes becomes, especially if you're a young person, well, saved from what, right? I mean, we're pretty safe here in the United States. We don't need to be saved. We don't have war, yet. We don't have anything terrible going on. We don't have a natural disaster at the moment. We don't have a blizzard and rain. What could we possibly need to be saved from? And the short answer to that is sin. We're saved from sin by Christ. Okay, so somehow, magically, not magically, Christ saves us from sin. And if you're a person that's living in a rationalistic world, you look around and you're like, well, I don't see how that could be, because Christ has been crucified for the last 2,000 years, and we still have a lot of sin going on. So how are we saved from sin by Christ? And we have to kind of break down a few words there. We're breaking down salvation, but we have to talk about sin for a second too, because that's a word that, for me as a young man, that people would talk about sin, and I thought, well, they're just trying to control me. If somebody tells me not to sin, they're just trying to tell me what to do. And that was very real for me as a young man. But sin doesn't necessarily have to be that kind of a connotation. Sin is actually an archery term. It means missing the mark. So if we were all archers and we were all sitting around doing the archery thing, right? And I shot my arrow and I shot at a target and I missed, somebody might just say sin, right? You missed the mark. And so sin is missing the mark. Well, what's the mark? The mark is God. The mark is the beatific vision, union with God, or heaven, if you want to put it that way, or everlasting life. And so when we sin, we're missing the mark. And in fact, some of the worst sins are the sins that don't necessarily impact the other people around us. They're the sins that just impact us. They call us actually sins against God, which is in a way another misnomer, because even though we're sinning against God, God isn't diminished by those types of sins. We're diminished by those. And so salvation is salvation from sin. Well, the short answer of how Christ does that for us, well, there's two kind of things, and I'm going to skip one of them actually. Okay, we have this idea of heaven or everlasting life, and that's a bit of a more theological conversation that we don't have time to get into tonight. And for most people in a rationalist, immanent framework, they're worried about today, right? It's like, talk to me about everlasting life. Well, I'm just trying to get through today. I just want to get through tomorrow. I want to get through next month. So what is Christ doing in the moment here to save me from sin? And the short answer is Christ is showing man to himself, right? Christ is sort of the fullness of what humanity could be. So Christ is showing man to himself. Well, what is it that Christ is meant to show us? If that's the next question that I would ask if I was maybe 17 years old. Well, Christ is meant to show us what true beauty looks like. Because if we can find beauty, if we can have a life full of beauty, then we don't have to worry so much about the sin, right? We can sort of shake off the sin that's around us. Well, what does true beauty look like? I believe, our tradition believes, that one of the highest forms of beauty that we can experience here on earth, let me say that again, the highest forms of beauty that we can experience here on earth is redemption. And at its heart, Christ is the story of redemption. Well, how do we know that that's who we are? How do we know that we seek beauty in redemption? Well, we have some hints. See, we're made in the image and likeness of God, which means that at our hearts, we like things that God likes, that we can look inside of ourselves a little bit too. Not all the time, we've got to be careful with that. We can't just only look inside of ourselves, but we can sort of test these things against the way that we feel. Now, let me give you a few redemption stories and see if these things ring a bell. Maybe you don't have to raise your hand and admit it, but ask yourself if you would cry if you saw this redemption story, or if you would think about it again, or maybe watch this movie again. Okay, here's a classic one. Angry billionaire falls in love with young woman and finds meaning with his billions and gets married and starts a family with her. Does that sound like something that's familiar and popular to most humans? That's actually one of the most popular tropes in the romance genre, actually. So we know that many humans like that trope. And it's because it's a story of redemption, okay? How about this one? Flawed ex-military alcoholic gives up booze and saves the world through some heroic act. We like that one as well. That's a movie I would go watch. I would watch that movie over and over again. That's one of the most common, most popular male tropes. And so Christ is here in this world at some level to show us what redemption looks like. And so by entering into redemption, into that experience of redemption, we can experience that sort of beauty. And I would argue that that is the most beautiful thing that you can experience. Well, how do you do that, right? So if you're looking at somebody, how do you, well, the answer is simple. And I don't want to stop at that answer, actually, because it's almost so simple. The answer is go to confession, right? You can experience redemption anytime that you want, and I'm sure all of you have. In fact, you can experience that over and over and over again. In fact, I would say it for myself, speaking for myself, the most beautiful experience that I ever had was when I came back to the Catholic Church, and I had a bit of a storied past that I could redeem myself from. That was really special. That's not a everlasting life heaven sort of story. That's a right here and a right now story. That was a true feeling that I got to feel. Now, there's one problem with this. There's one problem with this, actually, and I'm going to go there tonight a little bit. It's that you get to experience that redemption, and it feels so good. Wouldn't the logical next step be to just go out and do the next worst sin that you could do to experience the redemption over and over again? Doesn't that seem logical? I mean, if it's so good the first time, why not do it again, right? I mean, let's take a trip to Vegas, right? And let's see what we can get ourselves into so that we can experience redemption again, okay? Well, just like those tropes that I told you, you can like feel that one's not right? Like you just hold that one in your head for a second, you're like, well, wait a minute, I can't go to Vegas just so I can make a good confession. That's silly, right? So wait a minute, so that breaks the story down. All of a sudden, right, we just said redemption is beautiful, that if we can experience redemption, then we can enter into that with Christ. How do we continue to experience that? And there is another way, and there's a great grace that we experience in this world. This is one of those answers when people ask you about, how does religion deal with suffering, is that the world will provide you other experiences for redemption. You can enter into the redemption of others. You don't have to go to Vegas and do bad things just so that you can experience that. And this is that idea that where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. We've been given physical reality to experience this over and over and over as much as we want. And this is the beauty of entering into the Trinity of Christ. This is the ultimate story past our own saving, that we can enter into the saving of others. So Christ, at some level, is a model for this sort of thing. Again, this is not the whole story of Christ. I want to be very careful, and I want to be very clear that when I say these sorts of things, I'm not trying to get at the sum totality of Jesus, but I'm trying to provide a rationalist answer that we can use in our everyday lives with people. So, at this level, let's assume for the sake of discussion that we're going to enter into the suffering of others. Well, what does this really look like? What does this really look like? And this is that faith versus works question. So this is the next thing that we get leveled a little bit of criticism at. We say, well, the Protestant would say, saved by faith alone, and then the Catholic would say, well, I'm saved through faith and works. And this word works gets thrown around and it gets misconstrued a lot. And we have to be careful with that word, because what it seems like we're going to buy our way into heaven. It seems like if I just do enough work for God, I can fill out a checklist, and then when I get to the pearly gates, I can hand my checklist in, and St. Peter will be there and be like, all right, looks like you got 9 out of 10, and if we hold that up into the curve, I guess today we're letting in 9s, right? Thank God. Man, it's not like that. It's obviously not like that. And as Catholics, we know it's not like that. It's like, how do we explain that it's different? Because at some level, it's like, well, wait a minute, they say that we're saved through faith and works, right? So we've got to get through that. Well, to truly understand this idea of faith and works, I want to call your attention to the story of the vine. Christ says, I am the vine and you are the branches. This is one of the few times in the gospel where Christ tells us not only who he is, but also who we are. He points at us, a couple other times, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. But you are the branches, and I am the vine. And this is a beautiful image. This is one of my most favorite images. There's actually churches, I forget the name of the church, where they have a vine that grows up around the altar, and all of the saints are in the branches of the vine. Father probably knows which one it is, maybe he'll tell us. I don't know. Okay. And there's this idea of this vine that is flourishing upwards, okay? It's flourishing upwards. And the question is, how are we flourishing? Like how does this work, right? And the answer actually comes to our question of free will. And this is another one that is really hard, that we haven't done very much justice when we talk to young people or we talk to secular people, because we throw out words a lot like, well, it's God's will, right? That's a common one that we can say. And it's a good excuse sometimes, right? I use that on my farm when things go poorly. I just say, well, it's God's will, right? And all of a sudden, the responsibility is not mine and the responsibility is God, and I instantly feel better. But the reality is, in most of the instances, it was actually something that I neglected. And so we do have this element of free will. At least we think we do. Let's assume for a second that we don't. Let's just assume we don't. Well, if we don't have free will, we're cogs in a machine, and at that rate, there's really no point to having this discussion, because none of us can make any choices anyways. This is all a farce. So we have to assume, for the sake of our sanity, that we have free will. Okay, I think you'll agree with me. So the question is how much free will do we have, right? What does that free will look like for us? Are we fully free to do anything we want? We can't sin, or we can sin, we can do all those sorts of things, at which point, obviously, religion would be pointless, right? If we have that much free will, how much free will do we have, or how much free will do we want to have, is maybe a question that we should be asking ourselves. And I have an example, but it's a little bit of an embarrassing example. So I need a volunteer who's willing to just maybe get a little red in the face from a moment that gets awkward. I just gotta have a little bit of an awkward moment with somebody. Is there anybody that's willing to just end up in really? No, I promise it won't be too bad, and you'll be redeemed, and I'll be the one that looks kind of single volunteer in the whole place. All right, Brad over here is one of you. Brad, this is going to be really quick here, so you want it to be awkward for long. We're just going to let the awkwardness just go for a little bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to play a game, okay? And I want to play the game with you, okay? So are you ready to play a game?
Absolutely.
All right, he's ready. All right, so here we go. We're going to play the game. All right, ready, set, you go. That's a nice try, right? That's not... No, seriously, you go. You start. I'm giving you the first one. I'm being very generous here, Brad. I'm letting you go first.
This is hands off, or?
Well, that's not the game that we were in. So.
What little guidance? Be good?
Okay, so he wants guidance. But okay, Brad, you did really good. You can sit down. You actually did perfectly. We're being a play game. What was it that was so awkward about that moment with Brad? We didn't have any what? Instructions. We didn't have any rules, right? And so we can't play the game without rules. We can't play the game without rules. Now, we can play the game with free will. We can do all sorts of things, but we have to have some semblance of rules. So when we say, as Catholic Christians, that we have free will, what it means is that we have free will within the rules of the game. And the game is the physical reality that we're living in. And the ultimate rule of that, I'll give you a hint, although we're not going to go down that path too far, the ultimate rule of that is willing to good, right? We know that physical reality is good, God said it was good, and we know that it has some structure to it, it has rules, and so we know that there must be a will behind it, there must be some sort of intelligence behind it. So, we have this physical reality where we have free will, and we have rules, and we're meant to think that it's like a vine that is flourishing. And the best phrase that I've ever heard described of this is that we have physical reality is perfect, and it's getting more perfect every single day. And it's getting more perfect because our free will, combined with the grace of God, provides that flourishing upwards towards God. And towards what, we don't know, we can speculate. There's a word for that, it's called the eschaton, or the end of time. And we're led to believe, and right, so I believe that it's union with God, that all things will come to the fullness of God. I don't see how we can believe otherwise, right? If we believe otherwise, it would be a dark existence indeed. So we're flourishing towards God, and we're participating with God. And that participation is part of our saving. That participation is part of our saving. So the work that we're doing flows from our faith. We are not saved because of our works. We are saved through our works. That in doing those works, we are brought to the fullness of God, and we're able to participate within that process. I'll leave you with an analogy. This is one of those analogies, I think it breaks down to some levels. All of my students, when I teach, they like to find a hole in the analogy. Every analogy will break down to an analogy. So they're always like, oh, Mr. Schmitz, but what about, it's like, yeah, okay, I know, I'm trying to explain something complicated. So imagine, if you will, a young man who is off for summer break, and first thing he does is he's going to get caught up on video games, and he's going to maybe get caught up on eating Cheetos, and he's going to get caught up on TV, right? We've all seen this. So he's sitting inside, and maybe his dad takes a few days off, and his dad comes in and he says, hey, son, do you want to go outside, and do you want to build a treehouse with me? Now, a couple things could happen here, right? The young man could just flat out say, no, Dad, I don't want to build a tree house. I want to play video games, right? This is sad, right? You can feel deep sadness and hardship for that dad in that moment. His son maybe rejects the offer to build a tree house. The young man can say, well, all right, Dad, I'll go build a tree house with you. Whatever you say is fine. And they go out, Dad kind of, just like all dads do, he makes it perfect and square, and paints the windows, and puts a little roof on it. It's just a bland, square treehouse, and the young man builds it half-heartedly with his dad. Or maybe the young man gets really excited. Maybe he says, Dad, that sounds great. I've always wanted a treehouse. Could we put a slide coming down the treehouse? And Dad says, yeah, I never thought about that, but of course we could put a slide on the treehouse. That seems to fit with the idea of treehouse. And the son says, Dad, could we maybe have a little rope swing so that we could swing off of the treehouse and swing back and forth? His dad, yeah, boy, that's quite the idea. That's great, How about this, Dad? Can we put a platform on the top so that I can put a telescope up there, and we can look out at the stars at night from the top of our treehouse? His dad, being the type of dad that he is, well, of course, son. Why wouldn't we put a platform with a telescope at the top? Now the list goes on and on and on. You probably have your own ideas of what you would put in a treehouse. But this is sort of the relationship we have with God. The rule for the dad and the son was, well, we're going to build a treehouse. This is what we're doing. This is the idea. But the possibilities for that treehouse are unlimited. And so when we say that we're saved through works, we're saved through the grace of God, that we get to participate in this reality that we call physical. So it is not a checklist in that way. All right. Anything, questions so far that anybody wants to ask that you just dead stuck on? Nobody ever asks questions of these things. They never do. They always feel like they're going to sound, I don't ask questions out of my way. I feel like I'm going to sound stupid. So you wouldn't, though, if you did. Well, let's get to the final topic, the final sticking point. This is the one where everybody kind of comes to the idea that Catholicism is a little weird, right? The phrase out there, and if you haven't heard this one, you can take this one home, is that we belong to a cannibalistic death cult. Okay, that's one that gets thrown out there a lot. And it's kind of funny, right? If you really think those words through, right? And I don't know that that's true. I know it's not true. I wouldn't be Catholic if I was, but it's a very real perception of our faith, because we have this idea that we're going to participate in a sacrifice with God, and then we're going to consume God when it's all done, right? It seems a little weird, right? And if you were just coming into a Catholic church, it would seem a little bit trivial, right? Let's think this through. We have small wafers of bread. Do you know that you can buy those on Amazon? Like you can just go order them. Like you could have a dinner party tonight and you could have community hosts. I mean, I would feel like it was sacrilegious, but technically, they're just bought on Amazon, right? It's just food, right? But you wouldn't do that, not because of the sacrilegious nature of it necessarily, but because that would be a really odd thing to have at a dinner party, right? People would be like, what's this? These chips, they aren't very good, right? You don't have any flavor in these chips. Is there some dip that we're supposed to have here, right? So it seems a little trivial, right? And then let's talk about wine, right? Now you've got I don't know if is there any sacristans in here? Is there any sacristans? Not a single. Oh, we have a sacristan here. So you open the bottle of wine and then it sits back there for like weeks on end, right? And you wouldn't do this at home, right? You wouldn't have a dinner party. You're like, yeah, I've had this bottle. It's been open for like a month and a half. Everybody wanted it. You'd be like, what? This is odd. So if we're an outsider looking in, it looks like this is the most trivial thing ever. It's like if that's really, really God, when you get some nice bread, maybe some sourdough, something a little more extravagant, right? Well, you and I both know, right, that's not the point, right? The idea here is not that we are going to create some extravagant thing, because what we're focused on in the Eucharist is not what's outside of us in the physical world. We're focused on something more, something that's inside of us. And the phrase that gets at the heart of this, gets at the root of this, I just gave it away, is lift up your hearts, right? We lift them up to the Lord, because God wants our hearts more than anything. And so when we're approaching the Eucharist, we're approaching this idea that there is something more than physical reality, and that something can only be experienced within our hearts. And that's why it starts like that. Well, what do we really mean by that? Lift up your hearts. I mean, I think of, you guys have seen Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, right? Where he takes the heart and lifts it up, literally, right? Well, it's not literally. It's obviously not, because we haven't seen that in the Catholic Mass yet. And it probably won't. So it's not that. Well, what do we mean by our hearts? What do we really mean? Because it's not our physical heart. Well, this is where we have to get into the idea of the reality of the supernatural. Everything I've been talking to you about tonight so far has really been sort of physical in nature, right? And in some ways that kind of, I believe, takes it down a level. So I want to step back up into this idea of the supernatural and what we mean by the supernatural. Well, the word gives us a hint. Supernatural. So natural is here, and then we have super, which is somewhat above natural. Like the ancients saw this as heaven up in the sky. The church shows us this, right? We have this beautiful dome in the center, which is meant to kind of lift up our hearts to heaven. Or we have the Holy Spirit coming down over the tabernacle. So we have these places that lift us up to heaven. We're up into the supernatural. But it can be hard to wrap our heads around it, because, I mean, it's a beautiful dome, and I'm sitting here looking, I wish that my church Holy Family like Crystal had a dome like this. I'm jealous of your dome. It's a beautiful dome. It really is. We don't have a dome like that, but it's still just a dome, right? What do we really mean when we say that we're lifting up our hearts to heaven? Well, let's talk for a second. Let's go back to a little bit of an analogy or a little bit of a story, see if we can wrap our heads around what we mean by the supernatural. All right, now I need a little bit of some honesty from all of you here. This is going to be a hard one, so I'm going to ask a question. It's sort of a hard question to admit to, but has anybody in here ever felt the urge to waste time on your phone? Some of you are laughing. I'm going to take that as an assent. Like, yes, I have. Some of you are glaring at me. I also mean that has meant me wasting time on your phone. And there's a few people in the back that haven't changed expressions, so I think they're the only ones that are immune from that. Okay, so we feel this urge to go on our phone, and that's very real, right? I mean, nobody would argue with that. I mean, I'm feeling it right now. So maybe I need to check. If you need to check, just go for it. It's more a challenge, right? So we feel this urge to waste time on our phone. Now, could you have that removed? Like, could you go to the doctor and be like, doctor, I've got this issue, I've got this time-wasting thing on my your phone. He's like, oh yeah, we do orthoscopic surgery for that all the time. We actually don't have to put you under. We just go in, you know, and we have these little cameras, and like, you know how they like do knee surgery, and you can watch the whole thing, you know what I mean? And we'll just go in, and then we'll find that little bit of you that wants to waste time on your phone, and we'll just pluck it out of there, you know. And then just like the old West movies, you know, they like throw it in the metal pan, and it's ting, and you're like, oh, I'm cured. I don't feel the urge to go on my phone anymore. It's wonderful, right? So we know that that's not true, because we know that nowhere in us is that desire to go on our phone, Now, you might say, well, that's just, you're just talking about psychology, Nick. That's not anything that's supernatural. All right, now let me ask you this. If you were sitting here, let's say you came in church all by yourself, and you sat next to your friend, and your friend started to go on their phone, would you maybe feel like you wanted to go on your phone? And if there was a bunch of people, maybe you looked around, maybe you sat here, everybody else was on their phone, and you looked around, and you're like, well, I guess this is what we're doing. We're just going to go on our phone, right? Well, we have a phrase for this. We call this transpersonal agency or principality. And this is a supernatural reality that we can all feel that happens to us all. In this case, it would be like the demon of going on your phone. Now, I use a negative example to start because it hits home. We can all kind of relate to that. We're like, yeah, that one's got me. You know, I mean, I don't think you need an exorcism, but you know, if you wanted to talk to Father about it, you're probably more than willing to talk to you on your phone when you see it. But let's give a positive example here. Okay, let's think about something that's more positive, right? If you came in here and all of a sudden somebody started to have a conversation with you, you might feel that you wanted to have a conversation with them. Or if they started to sing, you might say, well, I guess we're singing, so maybe I'll do some singing as well. All right? So this can have a positive effect. And this is what we talked about when we talk about angels. We talk about this idea of transpersonal agency that's very real, that influences us every single day. And we can see this in our everyday life. Okay? So when we talk about lifting up our hearts, we're talking about that place inside of us that interacts with supernatural reality. We're saying, let's lift up our hearts out of time wasting, and let's lift up our hearts into song or into conversation or whatever else, into treehouse building with our sons. Maybe it would be another one that we could lift up our hearts into. All right, well, my question for you that I would ask of you is this. What is more you? Is it your body, or is it your desire to sing, your desire to build a treehouse? Is it your desire to waste time on your phone? Which one of these things is more you? Is it the desires that are in you, the things that you want to do, things that you have done, or is it just your body you're living in? I can actually give you, I know nobody's going to answer. It's a rhetorical question. Again, nobody ever wants to speak out because you're all very, very polite, which is really great. So the answer is actually that those desires that are in you are actually more you. Scientists have proven that every element in your body turns over every 7 years. That like literally the atoms in your body get, re-upped. Like as you eat and excrete, your whole body swaps out. I know it's kind of weird to think about. Like all of a sudden, I don't know about some of you might have an out-of-body experience thinking about this. Okay? This physical form is not you. What is you is something else. That's something else that the doctor can't pluck out, right? The doctor can't go in there and go ping into the copper pan because that something is somewhere that we can't find. That's the supernatural reality of your soul. That's who you are. And you know that that's you because you know it's there. You know that no matter what happens to your body, that no matter how sick you get or how damaged your body gets, that part of you that is in you, that is who you are. Okay? And we have a phrase for that. And it's really a bit of a misnomer. I'm going to warn you, okay? So this is a little bit of Thomas Aquinas for you today. We call that piece of you, that little bit that's in you, that soul, we call that actually your substance. Now, is that not a misnomer? Because what would you say is your substance? You'd say, well, my body is my substance, right? And Thomas Aquinas would say, well, your body's actually an accident. Your body is the accident that results from the substance. The substance is who you are. That's why he's using that word substance, like the stance that's inside. That's who you are. And then your body, and what you do, all that is the accident. And when we talk about the real presence in the Eucharist, what we're talking about is substance and accidents. And the wafer, what the wafer is just the accident. The substance of the Eucharist, the substance of that wafer, is changed when Father consecrates the host at every Mass. And it's that substance that is very real. Now, can you go into that wafer and pull out the substance of Christ and go ding into a copper pan? Can you break it down? Can you take it maybe into chemistry class and crush it up into one of those mortar and pestle things and be like, we're going to do a chemical reaction to get the substance of Christ out? Does anybody know even which one's the mortar and the pestle? I can never remember. It was like, which one's the mortar, which one's the pestle? And you crush and you right? We know that's silly. We know you couldn't do that. You could do that all day long. You could run every chemical analysis on it that you ever would want to, and you would never be able to pull out the substance of Christ. Just like you couldn't pull out the substance of you that's deep inside of you. And that's why the real presence is, at bare minimum, very plausible or very real. Right? Now, at some point, right, there's got to be a leap of faith that's in there. Right? We're never going to get past that leap of faith. There's just no way. Just like you have to have a leap of faith that all of the people around you have soul, right? Because you could probably tell yourself that they don't. And there's psychopaths that do. You can tell yourself you're living in a matrix and that all of the people around you are fake and you're the only one that's real. Like, you could go down that pathway, right? But yeah, faith, right? You're like, well, they seem pretty real. It's worked for my whole life to assume they're real. Okay, so at some level there has to be an element of faith. And you're not going to get past that with the Eucharist, at least in my opinion. There's always going to be that there. So, for an increase in faith, I want to come back to that a little bit because I titled this talk "For an Increase in Faith." Right? We say that when we say the Rosary, right? For the first beat, we say "For an increase in faith." And what do we really mean by that? Well, it's summed up in that word: lift up your hearts. It's the lifting up of our hearts. Now here's the thing about lifting up your hearts. We want so bad. I want it bad. I'm sure you too. We want our hearts to go all the way up right away. We want to go, dear God, here's my heart. It's all the way up. It's all the way up there, all the way. I'm already done. It's already up. And if that was the case, faith would be easy. Religion would be easy. This life would be easy. But the reality is that we all have a little bit of doubt. A little bit, maybe a lot of bit. I don't know, maybe you're at 90% faith, 10% doubt. Maybe it's 50-50 today. Maybe it's 10% faith, 90% doubt. And here's the thing about that. It's easy to get downhearted about that, to maybe, look at Mass, like my wife will cry sometimes during Mass. She's not here, and she'll probably watch the thing. I forgot that video, so I'm going to be careful what I say that. Right? But she'll cry, and honestly, I'm jealous of her because I want that kind of faith sometimes too. And the reality is, and we were talking one-on-one, you say, well, Nick, that's her and you're you. You don't have to worry about that. And that's very true, right? The point is not to be the best at faith, to win at faith, right? Or like somehow you get more faith, you get to sit in the front, right? Or you get more faith, maybe you can sit back and pray for everybody. It's not what it's about, right? The idea is just to increase in faith. Because if we increase in faith, then we're like that vine. We're always growing towards heaven. Because it's already perfect, and it's becoming more perfect. And it's not becoming more perfect because we do all of the work. It's not becoming more perfect because we have to make it perfect. And it's not becoming more perfect because God reaches down and just magically controls everything and makes it happen. It's becoming more perfect because it's like the treehouse, and we get to do it together. And that's the physical reality that we're living in. Okay, are there any questions, comments, or thoughts, or do you want to dispute anything that I've said, make me argue my case or anything like that? No. All right. Tonight we're going to spend some time shortly here in adoration. And adoration is one of those things where, I was a cradle Catholic, I was a fallen white Catholic, and I came back to the Catholic Church, and adoration was scary to me. It was very scary, especially scary if I was going to go to adoration in like an adoration chapel, sometimes churches are like a separate place for adoration, and there's always like somebody in the adoration chapel that seems to be really good at adoration. They like have a book, right? They might even have a notebook and they're like writing things down, like a rosary that seems like a really expensive rosary or something like that. So I was always nervous to go to adoration. And that might not be you. If that's not you, you can ignore what I'm going to say. But I didn't really understand what I was supposed to do. Like, why adoration, right? We already have Mass. Why do we have to do this? And the reality is technically, I mean, you don't, right? It's not like it's one of the precepts of the church. You're not required to go to adoration. It's not like it says, go to adoration once during Lent or something like that. But we get to go to adoration. And adoration is one of the tools that is available to us as Catholics where we can increase our faith. Now, it's a weird word. It's an odd word. If you're a 17-year-old young man, like I was, and somebody said, you have to adore Christ. You have to adore Christ. I would really question and say, why do I have to adore something? Right? That's a big ask, right? Aren't we supposed to choose what we get to adore? But we have to think a little bit about what adoration means. Now, if we look at the highest choirs of angels, according to angelology, are the seraphim. The seraphim are the angels that are closest to God. And the seraphim are kind of like the angels that are the generals. They're like in charge of the choirs below them, right? You gotta be careful. That's not a great analogy. It's the best I can do in short notice. So the seraphim are up there, and their job is to adore God. And the question is, well, why do the top angels, the most important angels of all, have to adore God? I mean, shouldn't the top angels be the ones fighting battles or something like that? Right? Like fighting the devil down there with swords, beating the snake into the dust or something like that. How is it that the top angels have to adore God? And that's because to fully enter into any kind of experience, you actually have to adore that experience. Okay? If we were to be a football team, we wouldn't be a very good football team unless we adored football. If we were to be a very good orchestra, we would have to adore the music, right? And so when we adore Christ, when we enter into adoration and we practice adoring God, what that does is it sets ourselves towards God. It makes it so that we hit the mark. Remember, sin is missing the mark. If sin is missing the mark, it would imply that we want to hit the mark. What is the mark? The mark is God. And the best representation that we have of God, the best experience that we have of God, the best reality that we have of God is Christ present in the Eucharist. And we can experience that every day of Mass, and we can experience that every time that we come to adoration. So, without further ado, I'm gonna move some things out of the way. Father is going to lead us in exposition, and I'll have a guided prayer through that experience, and